All right, welcome back. We live in a world that feels like it's getting more chaotic by the day, right? But what if I told you there was a strategy, not just for surviving all the shocks and surprises, but for actually using them to get stronger? Well, today, we're breaking down a framework that's designed to do exactly that. This quote right here, this really sets the stage for everything we're going to cover. We're moving way beyond just bouncing back. We're talking about a way to thrive because of the chaos, not in spite of it. So, here's our game plan for today. We'll start by talking about why resilience is actually a flawed goal. Then, we'll unpack a brutally honest formula at the core of this model. After that, we'll add 3 new strategic lenses, define what it really means to be anti-fragile, look at a fantastic real-world example, and then wrap up with how you can start applying this stuff yourself. You know, for decades, the goal has always been resilience, the ability to take a hit, shake it off, and get back to normal. But here's the problem. In a world of constant shocks, pandemics, tech disruptions, supply chain nightmares, getting back to normal just means you're standing around waiting for the next crisis to come along and knock you right back down again. And that's the central issue, isn't it? Most of our strategies are fragile. They were designed for a stable, predictable world that, let's be honest, just doesn't exist anymore. We need a whole new operating system, one that doesn't just weather the storm, but actually harnesses its energy. Okay, so let's dive into the nuts and bolts. At the very heart of this model is a simple but absolutely unforgiving piece of math that's going to completely change how you look at success and failure. The formula is Y equals A times I times D. Y is your venture's overall viability. A is the quality of your idea. I is your ability to execute on that idea. And D is the market demand. Seems pretty simple, right? But that little multiplication sign, that is the secret sauce. And just look at the difference here. If you use additive thinking, which is how most of us naturally think, you'd look at a score of 19 out of 30 and go, hey, that's pretty promising. But multiplicative thinking, well, it tells you the brutal truth. With zero execution, your brilliant 10 out of 10 idea and a 9 out of 10 market are worth absolutely nothing. Your venture is a 0. This is what's called the zero factor principle. A single 0 in any one of these core areas and the whole thing comes crashing down. It means your job isn't to balance a list of pros and cons. Your job is to hunt down and completely eliminate any single point of total failure. Okay, so once you have that unforgiving foundation in place, the model gets an upgrade. It adds what it calls a trioptic layer, which is basically 3 new strategic lenses to help you see and navigate the complexities of today's world. Now, this isn't about throwing away that core AID formula. Not at all. It's about building on top of it. It's about giving yourself a new way to spot the threats, and maybe more importantly, the opportunities that are totally invisible to everyone else. So here are the 3 lenses. First, you have to diagnose the type of shock you're facing. A recession is not a supply chain collapse, and you have to know what you're dealing with. Second, you look for the asymmetric bet. That's the opportunity with massive potential upside but very little downside. And third, you actively design your project so that it literally gets stronger from stress. And that brings us to the biggest mindset shift in this entire model. It's all about moving from a defensive position, just trying to survive, to an offensive one, where the chaos itself becomes a valuable resource. So here's the key difference. A resilient system gets hit, it might crack, but it rebuilds itself back to where it started. An anti-fragile system, on the other hand, gets hit, and that stress actually makes it stronger, better, and more capable than it was before. It literally profits from disorder. So how do you find these kinds of opportunities? Through a concept called convexity. It sounds fancy, but the idea is simple. You're looking for small, calculated bets where if they fail, you lose very little. But if just one of them succeeds, the payoff is absolutely enormous. It's a strategy of finding hidden lottery tickets in the middle of uncertainty. Now, I know this can all sound a bit abstract, so let's look at a real-world case study of a venture that actually put these ideas into practice and turned a near-fatal disaster into its greatest strength. So, meet this agri-tech startup in Nigeria. Their app was crucial for local farmers. But then, a 48-hour national internet outage hit, and their app instantly became a useless brick on everyone's phones. Trust evaporated, and almost overnight, 70% of their users were gone. Total collapse. So here's what they did. First, the failure. But instead of just panicking, they diagnosed the shock. They realized this wasn't just a tech problem, it was a supply problem, a lack of internet. The fix? They made a small bet on building an offline mode for the app. And here's the magic part. When the next crisis hit, a fuel shortage that stopped farmers from traveling, their little offline app became the most valuable tool around.
And the outcome was incredible. They didn't just survive, they became stronger than ever. They actually secured new investment, not because they had a cool app, but because they had proven their business model was anti-fragile. They were now more valuable because of the crisis.
So what's the big takeaway here? How can you actually start applying this kind of thinking to your own projects or even your career? Well, it starts with something called barbell discipline. Imagine a barbell with huge weights on either end and nothing in the middle. On one side, you keep the vast majority of your resources in something ultra-safe, super stable. Then you take a small portion and you use it to make a bunch of those high-risk, high-reward, convex bets we talked about earlier. The most important part of this is actually what's not on the barbell, the middle. This strategy forces you to completely avoid the forbidden middle. You know, those mediocre, medium-risk projects that just kind of drift along. You either go for extreme safety with your core or extreme opportunity with your bets. Nothing in between. So ultimately, this whole framework is really a massive shift in how you think. You stop balancing lists of pros and cons, and instead you ruthlessly hunt for those zero factors. You stop making generic crisis plans, and you start diagnosing specific types of shocks. And most importantly, you stop settling for just being resilient, and you start engineering everything you do for anti-fragility.
And that really leaves us with one final question to think about. In a world that promises more volatility, not less, is what you're building designed just to endure the storm? Or is it being built to actually harness its power?